let's get a timestamp right here. In a second, I'll get it. It is the 2nd of June, 9:20 a.m. Central Standard Time, and I've been led to work on something, so we're gonna make it do what it do. I thought I had, yeah, okay. I'll tell you, I knew I had. I'm recording, so that means I can come back and always edit it, so I'm good. You won't see none of this. Alright. Always. Alright, so I know you remember we were working on a series called Chronicles of an Oily Negro. This is some stuff that I think we're going to um, do in that vein. And I was giving an idea, and it's called the anatomy of a user. And so I'm not sure whether it's going to be a book. I know it's definitely going to be a teaching, so it's probably going to be a little bit of both. And so we're talking about how people use people, and with it coming under the auspices of the Chronicles of an Oily Negro, it's going to be dealing with church, or spiritual matters. So already off the top, we understand that users are opportunistic, they're manipulative, and they're non-remorseful. So those are going to be the key points that we're going to talk about. Then also we're going to talk about what a user looks like. Let's go. So while we're doing that, we're going to come on over here to Notion, and we're going to build it out in here. Continuous music. Oh Lord, I'm all up in my nose. Alright, so this is a song list. Let's come down in here. Share. Alright, so we're gonna put this under like a new oh crap. I don't know whether we would do N or A. We'll start this. Okay. Because it would have came over here. Alright, so let's see what we got. Let's see. We'll put that in a couple of places. I'm not even concerned with that. Let's do this. Control V. Let's see what we got. Oh boy.
This is sharp, raw, and heavy with truth. Placing the anatomy of a user under the banner of Chronicles of an Old Negro gives it the perfect grit. It takes it out of academic psychology and puts it right into the sanctuary, the community, and the lived spiritual experience. When you frame it under church and spiritual matters, use isn't just bad behavior, it's a spiritual parasite. People who use others in a spiritual or church ecosystem don't just drain resources, they exploit faith, manipulation under the guise of ministry, and leave people spiritually bankrupt. Let's lay down the foundational blueprint for this teaching book chapter. No fluff, just the raw anatomy, the three pillars of a user. Before we look at the face, we have to look at the engine. You identified the three core traits: opportunistic, manipulative, and non-remorseful. 1. The opportunistic engine, the when. Users don't build, they harvest. They do not operate on relationship time, they operate on crisis and convenience time. The spiritual blueprint, they only show up when the spirit of elevation is moving, or when they are in a valley and need your oil to pull them out. They spot an open door, a soft heart, or a season of vulnerability, and they move in. The shift, they don't look for people to love, they look for vacuums to fill. 2. The manipulative mechanism, the how. A user cannot survive in the light of plain honesty, so they must bend reality. In a spiritual context, this is dangerous because they will use the language of the kingdom to execute the desires of the flesh.
Wow.
The spiritual blueprint, they twist scriptures like honor, submission, or grace to make you feel guilty for setting a boundary. They turn their requests into divine assignments for your life, making you feel like rejecting them is rejecting God. The shift, they turn your discernment into a weapon against you by gaslighting your intuition. 3. The non-remorseful finish, the why it repeats. A user doesn't have a broken heart when they break you. They have a satisfied appetite. Because they view people as currency, they don't apologize when the money is spent. They just look for another ATM. The spiritual blueprint, when caught or confronted, they pivot to self-victimization or spiritual bypass. God has forgiven me. Why can't you let it go? There is no godly sorrow that leads to repentance, only the sorrow of being caught or cut off. The shift, they leave the wreckage and walk away clean, convinced they were the ones who were misunderstood. What a user looks like, the manifestation. If that's the internal anatomy, how do they show up in the room? What do they look like in the pews, the leadership meetings, or across the table? The chameleon, the flatterer, they don't come in growling, they come in singing your praises. They look like an answer to prayer. They are hyper-attentive, overly complimentary,
Wow.
and quick to call you prophet, pastor, or brother, sister with extreme intensity. They study your needs and mirror them back to you to gain access. The tell, the praise is too high, too fast, before history or trust has actually been earned. The professional victim, the needy anointing, they use their brokenness as a hook. In spiritual spaces, we are conditioned to run toward the broken. The user knows this. They look like someone who just needs a chance, or someone who has been hurt by every other church leader. They leverage your compassion to bypass accountability. The tell, they want your deliverance, but they refuse your discipline. The ghost, the disappearing act, they look like a phantom. They are highly visible when they need your platform, your prayers, your money, or your counsel. But the moment the transaction is over, or the moment you have a need or a boundary, they vanish into thin air. The tell, you only hear from them when they need a word, a favor, or a lifeline. The draft horse rider, the energy vampire, they look like someone looking for a mentor, but they are actually looking for a mule. They want to ride your anointing, your network, and your hard work because they don't want to go into their own wilderness to build it. They want the oil, but they don't want to press the olives. The tell, they want to be seen next to you, but they don't want to labor behind you. This gives us a rock-solid diagnostic tool for the classroom or the page. Where do we take this line of thinking next? Do we want to unpack the soil that attracts them, how good people unknowingly invite users, or do we dive deeper into the spiritual exorcism, how to cut them off without losing your own spirit?
Alright, let's come back and see. See, he trying to cut up like that. All the yeah, it didn't. Okay, so I like that. We're gonna do we're gonna call it research. Let's do convo. All right. So yeah, sun is going on with Claude this morning, which is cool. Let's do this. Let's get this. And let's come over to. See, it's not giving me my I'm going to. All right. I know that memory is full. You don't have to gain nothing new. I'm cool with that. So let's change that. I'm gonna do it this way. I'm gonna copy it from here because I edited it over here. This. Watch this. I'm gonna duplicate that. So, I should have something.
This can hit church culture, ministry culture, family systems, friendships, workplaces, and relationships all at once. I would build it like this: the anatomy of a user. Core thesis. A user does not relate to people based on who they are. A user relates to people based on what they can extract. People are resources to them. Relationships are transactions. Love is leverage. Loyalty is utility. The three primary characteristics of a user. 1. Opportunistic. A user is always scanning for advantage. They have an uncanny ability to appear exactly where benefit exists. When there's work to be done, they're scarce. When there's reward to be collected, they're present. They know where the spotlight is. They know where the resources are. They know where the influence is. And somehow they're always standing nearby when the blessing arrives. Church version. They don't show up for prayer meetings. They don't show up for setup. They don't show up for outreach. But let a microphone open up, suddenly they're cool. 2. Manipulative. A user rarely asks directly. Manipulation is their preferred language. They specialize in guilt, obligation, sympathy, flattery, spiritual intimidation. Instead of saying, open quote, I want something from you, close quote, they say, open quote, if you really love me, close quote. Or, open quote, God told me to ask you, close quote. Or, open quote, I thought we were family, close quote. They weaponize relationship to avoid accountability. Path 3. Non-remorseful. This is the most dangerous trait. A user can watch the damage they caused and feel nothing. Not because they don't see it, because they justify it. In their mind, you owed them. They deserved it. It wasn't that bad. You're overreacting. The absence of remorse is what allows the cycle to repeat. What does a user look like? Here's where it gets interesting. Most users don't look like users. If they did, nobody would let them in. Users often appear as servants, friends, mentors, leaders, family members, church members, romantic partners. They frequently hide behind good things. The disguise is often virtue. The mask of service. Some people serve because they love. Some people serve because service creates access. They don't want the assignment. They want the proximity. The assignment is simply the key that unlocks the room. The mask of loyalty. A user can appear loyal for years, as long as the relationship remains profitable. The moment profit disappears, so do they. The test of loyalty is not abundance. The test of loyalty is inconvenience. The mask of spirituality. This is where the Chronicles angle can really bite. Some users have learned church language. They know scriptures, church etiquette, religious vocabulary, prophetic language. Not because they're spiritual, because they've discovered that spiritual language lowers people's defenses. A wolf doesn't always wear sheep's clothing. Sometimes he wears choir robes.
That was
Diagnostic questions.
interesting
Instead
take.
of asking, open quote, is this person a user? Close quote. Ask, what happens when I have nothing to offer? What happens when I say no? What happens when I establish a boundary? What happens when I'm no longer useful? Those questions expose motives faster than almost anything else, because users love access, but they hate restrictions. Path the final revelation. The most dangerous user you'll ever meet isn't always another person. Sometimes it's the version of yourself that only approaches God.
Ooh.
That's the twist ending. Because before we identify the users around us, we have to confront
The
the
user
user
within us,
us.
yeah.
Have I loved people for people? Or have I loved people for benefit? Have I served God for God? Or have I served God for access? That's where the teaching moves from observation to transformation. And that's where the anatomy of a user stops being a lesson about them and becomes a mirror for us.
Okay, so now I like that. I like that, and that's where I feel like we need to start, because when we really consider, I should have put this up over here. When we really consider, when we look at, when we look at, I'm sorry, I'm doing 2 or 3 things at one time. When we look at it for what it is, oftentimes the you know, before we can adequately go through this process of of studying a user, we have to first of all make sure that we are not users ourselves. And I think that the most grievous place that we can be users is when we use God. You know, when we when we only talk to God when we want something. You know, when when we always have our hand out to receive, but we don't have our hand out to give. You can really tell the measure of a person by where they stand or how they act when they have the upper hand. You know, I oftentimes question myself. Let me give you an example. You know, when I have money, right? You know, we have seasons where you have an abundance and where you don't really have a lot. And so I I check myself with how I treat people that come and ask for money. And I'm not talking about people that you know, but I'm talking about just people on the street. You know, like you go in the gas station, depending upon what side of town you're on, you'll see them a lot. You know, and I find myself sometimes wrestling with, you know, why you keep coming asking me? You know what I'm saying? You know, things like that. And so, but I don't beat myself up because I give when I'm led to give. It's I'm serious. You know, you can feel that push when it's time to give, and that discernment when you shouldn't. But that only comes from having a relationship with the Creator. And when you have a relationship with God, when you have a connection with Yahweh, He gives the the blueprint. He gives the real time analysis, the real time direction of what to do, what not to do, and how and when to do it. So we are in here with the council. So we've had GPT set up. Let's see what Claude has. Claude is having some issues this morning. So I don't know. We may have to come back to him. Um, but let me see if we can build off of this. Using the site. Now, that is a very valid point at the end. The final revelation, as a matter of fact, the final revelation is where I'm going to start the series or the teaching. Because before we can adequately um, discern or disseminate or to teach on people being users, we have to make sure that we're not a user ourselves. And oftentimes, if we're not careful, we can end up being exposed to users and and get bit by users, and like a zombie, we take on the characteristics of users. I think that God has had me dealing with this in a controlled environment for years, so that we can study it. You know, it's kind of like the scientists. They'll study dangerous and infectious diseases in the laboratory. So I really do think that this will be beneficial to the body of Christ, and not only to the body of Christ, but also to just regular people, because users are everywhere. Not only just in church, but users are everywhere. Let's come back to here. let's take this and we're going to put it back in Claude. Not Claude, because Claude is not working right this morning. So I would have loved to have used all three parts of the council, but Claude is not feeling good this morning.
I think that's actually the stronger angle. A lot of teachings about users start with identifying them out there. But if you start with identifying the user in here, you immediately disarm the audience's tendency to sit there thinking about everybody else. Because the truth is, most people have been on both sides of this equation. We've all been used. We've all used. Maybe not maliciously, maybe not intentionally. But if we're honest, we've all had seasons where we approached people primarily because of what they could do for us. That's why your zombie analogy is powerful. A user bites a person. Then the victim begins adopting the survival strategies of the thing that wounded them. People used me, so now I'm going to use people before they use me. Nobody helped me, so I'm taking what I can get. I learned that relationships are transactions, and before they know it, they're reproducing the very thing they hated. That's not just sociology, that's spiritual contagion. What also stands out to me is your laboratory concept. Most people encounter users emotionally. You're talking about studying them. There's a difference. When a scientist studies a virus, he doesn't become fascinated with the virus because he loves it. He studies it because he wants to understand how it spreads, how it mutates, what environments it thrives in, how to recognize it, how to stop it. That framework could become a major part of the teaching. The user laboratory. Origin study. How are users created? Are they born that way? Or are they produced through trauma, entitlement, insecurity, neglect, pride, survival mechanisms? Transmission study. How does user behavior spread? How does one user affect an entire family, an entire church, an entire organization? Mutation study. How does a user evolve? The obvious user is easy to spot. The sophisticated user is not. Some users mature from taking money to taking attention, validation, influence, reputation, spiritual authority. Environmental study. What environments attract users? Churches without boundaries, families without accountability, organizations that reward charisma over character, places where access is easier than responsibility. Immunization study. How do believers protect themselves? Not by becoming cold, not by becoming suspicious of everyone, but by developing discernment, boundaries, wisdom, accountability, healthy expectations. And here's another thought that might become your opening statement. Open quote. Before we expose the user, we must understand the hunger. Close quote. Because of every user is power, attention, validation, resources, control, security. A user is rarely defined by what they take. They're defined by the hunger that drives the taking. That's why merely removing a user from a situation doesn't solve the problem. If the hunger remains untreated, the behavior returns. And that's where this becomes bigger than church hurt, bigger than toxic relationships, bigger than manipulation. It becomes a study of human appetite. The anatomy of a user is really the anatomy of an unchecked hunger. That's a teaching that can speak to the church, the workplace, families, leadership circles, and even our own walk with God. It begins with a question. Open quote. What am I feeding on? And what am I willing to consume to satisfy it? Close quote. That's a much deeper doorway than simply asking, who is using me?
Yes, sir. Let's see what young Gemini has to say about what I just said.
That right there is the master key. Starting with self-examination flips the entire script. It takes this from a finger-pointing lecture and turns it into a high-level diagnostic surgery. If you start by weaponizing the teaching against other people, you've already let the spirit of the user win, because a user loves nothing more than pointing out someone else's flaws to deflect from their own dirt. And that zombie metaphor? That's pure fire. The zombie anointing. You get bit by a user, the poison gets into your spiritual bloodstream, and instead of healing from the wound, you start mutating into the very thing that broke you. You become guarded, then calculating, and before you know it, you're using people as shields so you never get hurt again. Let's lay down this introductory framework, the laboratory phase. This is the preface, the opening salvo of the anatomy of a user within Chronicles of an Oily Negro. Act 1. The laboratory phase, the controlled environment. Before you can build a cure, you have to survive the pathogen. You aren't teaching this from a textbook. You're teaching this from the isolation chamber. God doesn't let you sit in a room full of users just to punish you. He lets you sit there to chart the symptoms. The biohazard reality. A scientist doesn't hate the virus. The scientist studies the virus to understand its replication, its entry points, and its mutation. You have been in a spiritual containment zone, observing the slickness, the manipulation, and the opportunism up close so you could write the field manual for the rest of us. The genesis of discernment, mirror before the window. We cannot look through the window at everyone else's flaws until we look in the mirror at our own motives. The oil can look like grease if the heart is slick. We have to audit our own reservoirs. The self-diagnostic test. Before we check the room, we check the pulse. Am I covenant or am I transactional? Do I look at people in my circle for who they are, or for what they can secure for me? Am I managing crises or building relationships? Am I only calling certain people when my altar is on fire, and I need their virtue to put it out? Am I consuming the oil or pouring it? Am I always looking to slip into someone else's momentum because I'm too lazy to press my own olives in secret? The zombie infection, the mutation of the wounded. This is where the teaching hits regular people and church folks alike. The most dangerous thing about a user isn't just that they drain you, it's that they can convert you. The 3 stages of the infection, the bitter bite. You get exploited by someone you trusted. The oil was poured out, they took it, wiped their hands, and left you dry. The defense mutation. To protect the remaining oil, you build a wall. But the wall is built out of the user's bricks. You start thinking, I'll never let anyone close enough to do that again. From now on, I control the transaction. The full turn. Now, you are calculating. You start looking at people through the lens of utility. You don't mean to, but the virus has taken over. You start using people for safety, using them for affirmation, or using them for labor before they can do it to you. You went into the fight a victim, and you came out a vector. This positions the work beautifully. It's universal. It applies to corporate boardrooms, family dynamics, street logic, and the church altar. Since this is the opening revelation where the teaching begins, how do you want to voice this introduction? Are we writing this as the grand opening declaration, the warning label on the laboratory door?
Man, and Claude still. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay, Claude in the building. Claude in the building. We got to get you caught up though. Um, Claude don't want to talk though. Man, I don't know why my nose itchy. I think it's because them hairs in there. So I may have to go about it another way. And then, okay, that's a strong title. Chronicles, before we build, then reflect the structure back to realign the jump, tap, 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 tap. Okay. All right. So I got to get you caught up. Something was going on, and it took you forever and a day to respond. So the council is already in session. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste everything that we've talked about, that the council and I have talked about, and drop it in here. And then we'll get your take on where you are, and then we'll do the same thing. Um, so what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll just copy all this. So he'll have I don't want to overload you with information, but it's going to be a lot, and you'll know who we was talking to because I've kind of labeled them out. See, didn't even get that. And then let's get. Yeah, we'll start from the top and work our way down this time. Um, Control V. Let's go. Not right now. I'm really believing that we'll start it off like a pilot of sorts, um, and the pilot can really be 3 parts. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not sure. We'll get that together later. But I know that I want to start it off with defining what a user is, and to make sure that we admonish everyone to do self-evaluation before you start evaluating somebody else. So we'll go. What time is it? 10 o'clock. So I think that's gonna be my time for right now. So um, matter of fact, let me go ahead and find this real quick. Should be in here. Um, Let me maximize it so I can see what I'm doing. It should be here. Did you go in there? Yeah, I know it did. There's a second. Yeah. All right. So we'll fix that. Stop